All right, guys, in this mini series of podcast episodes, I'm calling stories that should have made it into the book or the movie Black Hawk Down, but didn't. Today, I get a chance to go down memory lane with an aviator that I have the absolute utmost respect for. There may not be another person on the planet that I trust more, respect more in an aircraft than my guest today, Dan Jollota. And I guess I should say that I even have a couple of comments and maybe a conversation or two that I probably shouldn't be sharing on the air about just how incredible the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment is, the group that we affectionately refer to as the Night Stalker. On this episode, I get a chance to talk to one of my favorite Night Stalkers of all times, Dan Jollota.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
And before I get into the conversation with Dan, I just want to say thanks to the Solomon Foundation. Those folks are sponsoring this episode. And if you want to know more about how they help the local church grow, how they help people get an excellent return on their investment and make an eternal impact at the same time, well, just swing over and check them out at thesolomonfoundation.org. Now, here's my conversation with one of the greatest helicopter pilots I've ever seen in my life, Dan Jollota. Hey, Dan, thanks for being on this episode of Unbeatable with me.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm great, man. It is good to see your face.
It's good to see yours. It's been way too long.
I agree. Yeah. We were supposed to get together pretty soon. It doesn't look like that's going to work out. But you're now guest number 3 in a mini series that I'm doing. And I'm calling this mini series Stories That Should Have Made It to the Book or the Movie. I believe deserved to be in the book or the movie, but didn't make it. And your story is incredible, man. In fact, I really think there's a couple of comments that I need to make during this interview that I've never been able to say to you up until now, face to face, about what I saw and how much you inspired me during that fight.
No, Jeff, I appreciate what you're doing with podcasts. And, I think most of us still lie along the road of being quiet professionals, and nobody wants to talk about, what happened 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But the biggest fight since Vietnam, and it changed so many TTPs, techniques,
Yeah.
tactics, techniques, and procedures that carried forward into the current fight for OEF and OIF. There's so much that happened during that event that we just kind of moved on from it,
Yeah.
and everybody else has moved on, but it's good talking about it, and it's good, always good catching up with you, by the way.
I'm glad you said that, because it is good to talk about these stories that I don't know that I would be having these conversations today if it wasn't for us coming together a couple of times over the last 30 years. But even when the book and the movie Black Hawk Down came out, my mother saw the movie in the movie theater, and she knew that I was in Somalia. She didn't watch the news, so she didn't know what happened. She watches the movie and she calls me sobbing uncontrollably and said, "Jeff, I just watched the movie and I had no idea what happened to you and your buddies over there." And I said, just what the comment you just made. We were quiet professionals, Mom, and this isn't polite Thanksgiving dinner table conversation. So I just kind of kept it to myself until the movie came out, and now I get the opportunity to talk about it a lot.
And it was a different era back then. I mean, 1993, we had no cell phones and no Wi-Fi and no social media.
Yeah.
And, there was events that happened, and I'll tell you a little bit about the beginning of the whole thing with me that caused us to just kind of do our job,
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
afterwards, we dealt with the aftermath of it all,
Yeah,
But,
some people are listening and they can't even remotely imagine a world without cell phones and internet and social media and instant communication. I wrote letters back and forth to my wife. They went on the big C5 bird back and forth to the States. And more than once, we got the letters out of order. So I don't even know what she's talking about.
Right.
True story, Dan. When I get letter number 2 that says, hey, the baby and I are, and I was like, what baby are you referring to? I don't know what baby you're talking about. When letter number 1 shows up a week later that says, congratulations, daddy, we're pregnant for the first time.
Oh my God.
That's the age of communication that you and I lived in.
Right.
What seems like 100 years ago back in Somalia. I want people to know about your incredible career as an aviator. You retired as a CW5. Very few human beings in American military have made it to the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 5. But Dan, I think you have more service in the military, I'm not exaggerating here, than anybody I know personally in my life. With 40 years, basically off and on, 40 years of total service to our country, man, I cannot tell you thank you enough for all that you've done for us.
Thanks for saying so, Jeff. And you can't eat the elephant all at one time.
Right.
It's one bite at a time. And I never thought in 1976 when I enlisted as an E1 in the military police corps that 30 or 40 years later that I would retire as a CW5 aviator.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. It's an amazing path. Amazing journey. It's not the destination that's important. It's the journey.
It is.
Kind of makes everything more appropriate.
Yeah.
But thank you for saying so. I appreciate that.
Dan, I've been on stages for years all over the world telling people about the men that I had the privilege of serving with. And I never talk about the Night Stalkers without using this language, and I mean every word of it. So anybody's ever heard me say this from the stage, I meant every word of it. These are the greatest helicopter pilots on the planet. There isn't even a close second. And you spent many, many years with the Night Stalkers. Let's talk about how you went from being a private MP soldier to becoming a helicopter pilot and doing the incredible in your incredible career as an aviator.
First of all, the Night Stalkers are an amazing group of people because of the people.
Yeah.
They were formed out of a failed hostage rescue attempt in 1980 in Tehran, and the nation identified the fact that they needed a premier helicopter force to really support the ground forces that were established back many, many years ago. And then obviously another organization that was formed just a few years before that failed attempt. But they continue to amaze me just because of the people associated with it. And people wanted to do more than what's expected of them.
Yeah.
So they train hard and they fight hard and they're passionate about what they do. But it's a grind. But my career started as an MP because my dad was a cop. And I
didn't
thought
know
I wanted
that.
to be
All
a
right.
law enforcement guy.
Yeah.
It lasted 2 years, and then I met some special forces guys. They were going through ANOC, the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer course. Talked me into changing my job to a combat engineer, went to airborne school, went to SF school.
You were an 18 Echo. Is that right?
I was a
Charlie.
12 Bravo S, but I was an 18 Charlie eventually.
18 Charlie, yeah, okay.
So I was a demolitions guy.
All right.
Served on an A-team for a while, and then started jumping out of airplanes for a living and met these awesome parachutists called the Golden Knights.
Yeah.
Assessed, got picked up on the Golden Knights, and spent 4 years jumping out of airplanes for a living.
What?
And then met these aviators in the 80s that were Vietnam era pilots that had 40 and 50 air medals, and they were just unbelievable warrant officers out there serving, in the Golden Knights. And they convinced me to apply to flight school, and that started the whole path of this aviation thing. That it just went from one thing to another, and I got offered to go to this event and this selection and this assessment and this training. And it's amazing, looking back on it, it's amazing how you go down this path and you try to figure out where to go on these crossroads.
Man, I got to explain a few things to the audience just now. Okay, you have just went literally from the best to the best to the best in a very short period of time. 18 series, the Special Forces, the Green Berets of the U.S. Army. Nobody can do that mission that they do all over the world better. And then you go to the Golden Knights. And for the listening audience, this is the United States Army's exhibition parachute team, which goes and competes. Well, they demonstrate skydiving capabilities or they compete in skydiving competitions all over the world and very regularly bring home gold medals. I had no idea. I was a sky, I did sky, or I mean, I had the skydiving mission in the Ranger Regiment for almost 20 years. And I have a lot of jumps under my belt, but I don't even need to ask to know you have far more jumps than I do. How many times did you jump when you were with the Golden Knights?
Yeah, so
Ballpark figure.
I have a little over 6,000 jumps.
6,000 jumps.
And, a little over 10,000 flight hours.
Yeah.
So I'm addicted to the air, Jeff.
Yeah,
very much.
You got me by about 5,725 or 5,750 jumps. You got a little bit of a advantage on me there.
But I'll tell you a real quick story. I had a great advantage and really great surprise to go to jump school in 2014 as my daughter was attending jump school.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And so here's this old raggedy W5. And it's a good story because I had been on Halo status for 18 years before that. And I had to get current in the static line world. So I made a jump in June and then went down to jump school in July.
You jumped with her. Tell me you
jumped
with
my
her.
daughter.
Oh,
so I was
that's
sitting in the
amazing, man.
Sitting in the C-130 with her. And it was the most memorable event because we stood up. And you'll appreciate this because you're a jump master and you're a very experienced static liner. We stood up and I tried to hook up, and the safety was in my face because I was having a problem trying to get the double gated static line hook. And my daughter is sitting next to me, and she's laughing at me. She's thinking I'm such a rude.
She's like, this novice doesn't know what he's doing in an
so
airplane.
I finally just put my hands up and I gave up, and the safety had to undo my static line and hook me up. And
oh, that's so funny. And people are probably looking at you like, this guy's only had 2 or 3 jumps in his life. Meanwhile, 6,000 jumps later, dude, that is a memory that I would cherish, being able to be with your daughter on one of her first jumps.
God. We ran off Fryer Drop Zone, at Benning.
Yeah.
And I guess more these days. But we had such a good memory of that.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
Getting airborne wings in her.
I want to try to explain, and this, I was thinking about it before this episode. This is going to be hard for me to do. I want to try to explain with your help, Dan, just how amazing the Night Stalkers are. So play along with me, William. I was thinking about it, probably 1,000 combat missions in the air. And most of them, 80, maybe close to 90% of them have all been in Night Stalker helicopters. The 10-20% that have been with other units, I didn't realize just how good the Night Stalkers were until I flew in combat with other units. So I want people to understand just how talented you and the other Night Stalker pilots are, the whole unit. And like you just said, it's the people. It's not the aircraft. It's not the equipment. It's not even the amazing training, though the training itself is incredible. It's the people that are in the aircraft that make all the difference. But one of my earliest memories of being in a 160th Black Hawk was in training in Panama. And those, I was in the reconnaissance detachment of the Ranger Regiment. We were inserting ahead of a Ranger battalion to go do a little reconnaissance mission. And there was a Black Hawk that was supposed to fly us in as fast and as low as it could, insert us into the jungle, in a little jungle opening, and then get out of there. This helicopter was flying through the Chagres River, and it was banking turns so low and so fast that the blades were splitting the water at the surface level in the Chagres River. And I remember thinking to myself, I think we're going to crash in this river before we even get inserted. And without a doubt, this guy pops up, gets right to the opening, drops us in there, and is out of there in a matter of seconds. And to this day, it's some of the most impressive flying that I've ever done. And that's not the first and the only time I've seen Night Stalkers do something pretty incredible with their aircraft. Would you describe, you have hours and hours, in many hours in an aircraft before you can even apply to the Night Stalkers. But would you describe a little bit of Green Platoon and kind of what it takes to really identify, is this person talented enough to be in this unit?
Sure. And one disclaimer I'll tell you right now: maybe that Black Hawk pilot in the Panama was flying a little bit too low,
well,
a little
maybe
bit too fast. But it's incredible. Green Platoon, for the audience, is just the training mechanism. Once a person, a male or female, successfully completes their assessment process, which is a week or 10 days long, they get put in a pool to go through the training. And then their Green Platoon, these days, I don't even know how long it lasts, but it was about a year. But it just assesses your ability to learn, because they want raw skills. So let me back the story up a little bit. When I was my first aviation assignment was in Korea, and I tried to apply to the Night Stalkers from Korea, because I'm a former Special Forces guy, former Special Ops guy, so I know where I want to go and what I want to do. At the time, they wouldn't take me.
Really?
It's because they didn't, and I still don't think they have the time to teach you the basics.
Yeah.
So they wanted 1,000 hours, and they wanted 100 hours of goggles at that time. I'm sure it's changed by now, but they wanted some experience under your belt to make sure that you were a safe pilot and a competent pilot. And oh, by the way, one more disclaimer: I don't know if I'm in that talent pool you just talked about with the 160th, but we went through Green Platoon, and they continue to challenge you and teach you how to do what. And it's an exacting world, as you know, plus or minus 30 seconds. We live off plus or minus 30 seconds. Matter of fact, the funny story is I tried to bring plus or minus 30 seconds home to my wife and kids. And eventually
I bet that went over well.
Dan, you got to stop doing this, because your kids don't. So if I wanted my kids to be somewhere on time, I would always tell them we had to be there 30 minutes prior, so that I could relax and not worry about the time. But besides the physical aspect of Green Platoon, the mental aspect of Green Platoon, it was challenging intellectually, challenging physically, but through hardship bonds people, and so you were with similar people that wanted to. What I tell people all the time is, you're striving for perfection, understanding that you'll never achieve it. So making yourself better every day, and you make mistakes along the way, and you have to recover from those mistakes and to better yourself. And then as time went on, you get better and better and better, and you want more. I tell people all the time, it's merry-go-round of life. It's pretty funny. Most people, and I'll call the 99%ers out there, just love the merry-go-round of life, and if they get one brass ring along the way, then they're satisfied. Guys like you and guys like me, we get a brass ring just to put it in our lap and look for the next brass ring. But anyways, Green Platoon, very challenging, you don't know sometimes if you're doing well or not doing well, but it's an upfront and personal type experience where there's nobody looking to stab you in the back, and if you were making a mistake, you can expect someone to be in your face telling you you're making a mistake, and you have to correct your actions.
One of the reasons I wanted you to describe Green Platoon is because I wanted people to start to get a grasp on the camaraderie that you develop in the unit. And it's really hard. Truth is, for anybody who's not served around that kind of really talented, highly committed people, and then gone through those kind of hardships together, even my own closest family relationships don't share the camaraderie with guys like you and others that I served with in combat. And it's hard to explain what builds that tight of a bond. And Green Platoon is brutal and relentless for a long time. And when you're done, man, the abilities of those leaders are amazing.
What's amazing too, Jeff, and you hit the nail on the head. But I think through hardship and through pain and suffering builds bonds.
Yeah,
So if
definitely.
I'm with you and we're doing something together and we are suffering either physically or mentally or psychologically or emotionally, and we get through it, we're bonded together for life.
Yeah.
But Green Platoon, just like the training that you went through, and when you get there, you think you're all that at the end, but you're not.
You're not. You're definitely not. Yes, that's right.
You just started. You're just at the bottom of the barrel, and I got a real quick. Can I tell you a funny story about?
Yeah, love to.
So, served in Panama,
Uh-huh.
did all that stuff. Went to the 160th in the spring of 1990, and as you know, Desert Shield, Desert Storm went
Yeah.
down. I got left at home, and so now I'm in the 160th, the most premier flying organization in the world. My wife, who was a captain in the Army at the time, deploys the Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
Oh, yeah.
I walk into the brigade, the 101st Aviation Brigade Family Support Group, and I walk in as the only
spouse.
male, as a spouse supporting my wife that's going overseas. And the brigade commander's wife was so funny. She's like, "What are you doing here, sir?" I'm like, I am just participating.
That's right.
As a spouse, supporting my wife. So I guess my point was, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just continue to train hard and deal with whatever and serve as long as you can, because it's a taxing world for the family.
It is. I want to talk about your wife a little bit more in just a second. I got one more awesome story about the Night Stalkers before we get into that fateful 18-hour firefight. Fast forward years later, I'm a squad leader in the Ranger Regiment. We're doing some battalion training down in Panama, and we're going through some jungle training. Most of my guys are brand new to the Ranger Regiment, brand new to the jungle, and brand new to the Special Operations Task Force. So they've never been on the back of a 160th helicopter when we show up to Panama. And I pull the pilot and the co-pilot off to the side, and I'm like, guys, I got a $20 bet for you that between the time that we take off and the time that you insert this bird full of my squad, basically my squad had an entire Black Hawk. By the time that we get to the target, I have $20 that says you can't make everybody in the back of this aircraft throw up. And they're like, oh, it's on now. And I noticed your reaction, Dan, because when I said, I bet you can't make everybody throw up, that included me. But they just kind of thought the rest of the squad. And I got, to this day, the greatest ride I've ever experienced in my life. It was incredible. I don't even have the time to describe how amazing that flight was to that target that day. And their only stipulation was, if they throw up, you have to clean it up. And I was like, deal. If you guys can get everybody throwing up in the back of this helicopter, then I'll clean it up and I'll give you $20 each. And they were like, oh, it's on now. So I want the listeners to know just how amazing these pilots are. But Dan, now I got a bone to pick with you, actually, with those pilots, because from that ride alone, that one helicopter ride, I have been ruined for the rest of my life. I can't get on a roller coaster anywhere in the world without sitting back and being bored, because of the ride that I had on that helicopter over the hills and through the valleys in Panama. Every roller coaster that I've ever been on, frankly, just pales in comparison to the ride that I got on the back of that helicopter in Panama.
Well, but Jeff, you and most of the listeners out there, think that's a really brutal story, but the pilots would actually, do maneuvers to make people sick in the back. And most of the aviators out there, including myself, was like, that is not our intent.
That's right.
Because, if you do those maneuvers to get somebody sick and back, then when you get to target, as well as I, you're worthless, But you're talking about the bond between pilots and the Rangers,
let's just call them the customers. What the Night Stalkers call them, and the customers in the back.
customers in the back, but you're talking about a bond between you and the pilots that is forever lasting in my heart.
Yeah.
That bonds us to do things that's beyond what most people understand or most people think is reasonable. But the most of the aviators out there just want to be a good supporting element to the ground force, to the customers. And you grow, at least I did, you grow such a mutual respect between the ground forces' commitment to the ground and your commitment to the customers, to the guys in back, that you'll never leave them. I mean, and it kind of segues off into our Task Force Ranger world when we bonded together so well that, we aviators, most of us felt so helpless because you guys were stuck out there on the ground and we couldn't help you get out, for those hours and hours and hours. So anyways, I just think that, it's good you can't get on a roller coaster without thinking about the Black Hawk, but really for your listeners and for most of us aviators, that's really not our intent, is to make everybody sick in the back, I'd much rather be healthy, when we got to the ground.
I wanted my guys to know you need to be ready for anything at any time. And as intense as this ride might be, I did right before you may remember, right before we got ready to, we assembled together in North Carolina and then launched for Somalia. We were doing a giant joint exercise out in Texas, and I was riding on the pods of a little bird, flying at night, really fast, really low. I didn't even realize how low and how fast we were going with the Night Stalkers until we came across this ranch out in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and we came across a herd of cattle. And as we came across the herd of cattle, it occurred to me that I'm looking at the cattle in the eyes as we're flying by them in a little bird at night under nods. And I was thinking, that makes us just a few feet above ground level. But of course, it's flat for, 100 miles out there. Just how fast we were going, how low we were going. I was thinking, I feel totally safe on this helicopter because of the people that are in the cockpit. And there's nobody else that I would trust to do what I'm doing right now with but the Night Stalkers.
Yeah, and safety is paramount. You know that as well as I.
Yeah.
But sometimes the low flying is to get away from radar, and you're absolutely right. You need to train to do that before the bullets are starting to fly, and you're actually in combat. So those guys, the guys and girls, the ladies these days that are doing that job, I mean, they train hard.
Yeah.
They train hard to exact their techniques and exact their procedures to make sure they support you guys as well as they can,
I've been around the world's military, and I will still say it to this day. There is no one in a helicopter that can do what Night Stalker pilots can do.
I'll tell you a quick story about 1993. And, like you just talked about, we were in North Carolina, we were in Texas, we were training. We were on again, off again, going
That was crazy.
Somalia.
Yeah.
My wife, who was in the 101st, she was a company commander with a planned deployment to Mogadishu, Somalia. We knew 6 to 8 months out that she was leaving.
I
in
just
August.
learned this today. This is incredible.
And so she left. She left in August. And Jeff, this is a great story because my mother-in-law from New York comes down to take care of our 15-month-old boy. And we get home on a Saturday night, and everything's turned off. We're not going anywhere. We're not doing anything.
Yeah, I remember.
The mission's done,
yeah.
right? And my company commander, who will remain nameless, calls me up on the phone. Now, this is 1993, so there's no connectivity or anything. I don't even know if my wife's okay. I'm sure she is because she left about a week or so before that. My company commander calls me and says, "Hey, Dad." I said, "Hey, boss, but why are you calling me on Saturday night?" Just seeing how you're doing. So he's tiptoeing around this whole subject, and he finally says, "Where's your mother-in-law?" I said, "She's here. She leaves tomorrow morning, going back to New York." And he says,
"Let me guess." He says, "No, she doesn't."
No. He says a line that I'll remember for the rest of my life. He says, "Why don't you put your son on a plane with her?"
Wow.
And I went. He didn't have to say anything else. So I drive to Nashville, put them on the plane, and all of a sudden my pager goes off,
Yeah.
911, and
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We get over there, and my wife meets us at the airfield. Hey, not hi, Dan, how are you? Where's our son? Because she has absolutely
Oh,
no idea
that's
at that
so
point in time.
crazy. Wow.
I thought about Jeff. I thought about telling her, I just put 2 diapers on him and left him a bowl of
Yeah,
food.
there's a bowl of food and some instructions pinned to his diaper. He'll be fine.
But that was not the right moment to
Yeah.
do that. But yeah. So, anyways, that started the whole process of her and I being over there together.
Dan, I haven't had a guest on this show that's a military family without thanking the family for their sacrifice. In your case, you're making sacrifices for your wife's career in the U.S. Army. She's making sacrifices for your career and your son, your family. Your whole family's making sacrifices. And man, I want to tell you, as a warrior, thank you for your service. But as a military family, thank you for your sacrifice at the same time. I just learned about all of this today.
Well, fast forward the story. So my wife's a West Point graduate. Both my kids are West Pointers. And the son served for 5 years, and now he's in a PhD program. And my daughter, and you may have to bleep this out, but she's a badass helicopter pilot.
Awesome. All right. Nice.
But it's just, yeah, it's funny how all happens, Jeff. It all puts together.
Well, let's get to the reason for this interview, man. I'm going to say something to you face to face. Well, actually, over this, video that I have not had a chance to say to you in person, but I've said about you a lot. Dan, I've been shot at. I've been in Night Stalker helicopters that had to make emergency landings from gunfire, but I have never in my life seen an act of courage in a helicopter like I've seen from you in Somalia. And I did all of this preliminary to describe how amazing the Night Stalkers are, to set up what you did in Somalia. And not just you, but everybody that was in the air. The truth is, everybody that was on the ground, everybody that was in the vehicles, the whole force was equally courageous. But man, what you did, I will take to my grave as the single most courageous thing I've ever seen somebody do in the air in combat. So I want to turn things over to you now and tell them your role in Task Force Ranger. Take us all the way up to putting Rangers in the ropes down on Wolcott's crash site.
Yeah, it's amazing because we, as most of your readers know, I mean, we were out for 6 different times, before before that happened. I had the role with Herb Rodriguez and Kenny Hickman and Daryl McKeon. The 4 of us had the role of being the combat search and rescue. CSAR is basically what it is.
Hey, I want to pause for a second. I need to explain this phrase to the listener. I went into Just Cause as the theater level CSAR, and CSAR basically means bad stuff really happened. Something bad really, really happened, and we need you to go where something bad really happened. Nobody wants to be on the CSAR, but it's vitally important to the mission. And you're designated as the CSAR element for the whole force. Sorry to interrupt.
And I have a whole ground force in the back that were all medics and litters and
a couple of war fighters back there.
Yeah, first responders, and we had all kinds of people ready to react to whatever type of search and rescue mission we got called on. The week before 3 October, on the 25th of September, the 101st had a Black Hawk shot down by an RPG.
I remember.
It caused us to go into a rehearsal mode. And so we took an aircraft and then had that aircraft go down. I don't know if you remember this. And we rehearsed the CSAR operation.
No, I don't remember doing that. Yeah.
You don't remember doing that? Because you probably weren't participating in it. And the sad part about the whole thing, and it still hurts my heart to this day, is we use Super 6-1 as the down aircraft.
Oh man, yeah.
And so as the listeners will understand, if they don't know already, Super 6-1 was the first Black Hawk that got shot down with Cliff Wolcott and Donovan Briley on board. But anyways, we rehearsed the whole thing because we thought at that point in time, if we're needed in the fight, then maybe we should be rehearsing it to make sure we got everything down. So fast forward the operation, 3 October, As everybody understands, we lost, a dear ranger and the insertion of the whole thing. And then everything was going as planned, until that first Black Hawk got shot with an RPG, and the first Black Hawk went down. And then my guys in the back were all scrambling because they knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, sure.
It was our time to participate in the fight. Because the city was so dense, we did not know exactly where the aircraft landed. We had observation aircraft above us that were trying to help us. And eventually, Super 6-2 with Mike Gaffina and Jim Yacone on board, they ended up giving me steering directions in the air. You probably don't even know this, but it was like turn left, stop, turn right, stop, go forward 2 blocks, stop.
All right.
And so when I got into a hover, I remember this to this day. I went over a power line, make sure my tail didn't hit the power line. I settled into about 32 feet. And as the readers understand, the fast ropes were about 120 foot long, but you never want to put ground guy on a rope for that long. So 32 feet. And we're settled down. I looked out my left door, and literally less than a block away was Super 6-1's aircraft.
Yeah.
And so everything's going well. I think that we're getting small arms because it's a metallic clicking that you hear, as you know. It's not a very welcoming sound at all. But at some point in time, an RPG strikes my aircraft so hard, it rocked us left and right, fore and aft. And I was on the flight controls at the time. Herb Rodriguez, my co-pilot, was also monitoring them. But my initial reactions was to get out of there. So when I pulled in power and started climbing, to this day, Kenny Hickman and Daryl McKee in the back were screaming at me because we had soldiers on the ropes. They were clinging for their life at that point in time because they're on a merry-go-round ride, trying to figure out what to do next. And I only think we climbed probably 200 to 300 feet above the ground. And then Kenny and Daryl talked me back down into that hover hole. So at this point in time, aircraft's damaged, but it's flyable. And we settled back into that hover hole to let those people off the rope. And then we really realized we had an aircraft damage. With one already down in the city, my initial intent was to get back to the airfield. So all 4 of us talked, and the damage to the aircraft was not significant, but it was damaged in whistling. It had a hole in the blade. Transmission oil was bleeding out the back, and I was losing transmission oil pressure. Transmission oil temperature was climbing. But as fate would have it, and fate kind of jumps into everything we do, right? I turn the aircraft towards the airfield, and I see a soccer field. And soccer field's halfway between me and the airfield. And we talked about it, the boys and I all agreed to say, okay, let's get to the soccer field and see how the aircraft is doing. Get to the soccer field, still flyable, but we're losing transmission oil rapidly. And with the Black Hawk, as any Black Hawk pilots will listen out there, they know you can fly with fly a Black Hawk without any transmission oil for about 30 minutes. So we get to the airfield, we land on the runway, and then I realize we're on the only runway in Mogadishu during a firefight.
Right. Might need to clear this aircraft off the runway.
I told the boys, I said, I got to pick it up to a hover. So I picked it up to a hover and parked it. And then when I shut it down and took a look at the blade, Jeff, I mean, I don't know how that blade held together. Because I took a picture of it and sent it to Sikorsky weeks later and just thanked him because it looked like someone took a bite out of it.
Right.
But I don't even know how that blade held together.
Yeah. I want to pause. I want to pause you right there, because this is the moment, and I saw this after the fact. So At this point in the fight, I'm actually driving Blackburn back to the base. I'm under fire. Pilla is killed. I make this call on the command net that Pilla's dead. And I'm trying to fight my way back to the airfield. But honestly, I'm in over my head in this really small 3-vehicle convoy. After the fight is over with, we all get together. You may remember this, and we're reviewing some of the surveillance footage from our aircraft that are in the airs. And I watched what you did. And that moment has never, ever left me, because when your helicopter got hit, it is very, very well noticeable from the surveillance footage. And I watched the RPG hit the tail. I watch you start to lift the aircraft. I see that there's still Rangers on the ropes. And any human being would say, I got to get out of here. We're already taking small arms fire. I can hear the clicking in the metal. We just took an explosive device to the tail. We're all going to die if we stay in the air where we're at. And then I watched you put that helicopter right back in and to a hover and hold it there until everybody got off the rope and they cut the ropes away. And Dan, to this day, that is the most courageous thing I've ever seen somebody do in the air in my life.
It wasn't me, Jeff. It was those two crew chiefs in the back, Kenny Hickman and Daryl McKeon, that really talked me out of what I wanted to do.
Sure. Everybody on that aircraft wanted to get the heck out of there because we're going to die if we stay up here in the air. And you stayed up there in the air, which is entirely contrary to human nature. And I don't know if I can even find the right words to explain that to the audience. But your role doesn't stop. Man, if it was just that alone, you would be on my list of one of my most respected aviators. But your role doesn't stop there. So now pick up with what you do next after you take the aircraft back to the airfield.
Yeah, I'll tell you and the audience, it's the bond and the commitment to the guys in the back that caused my next move so we landed at the airfield. We had one spare aircraft. The one spare aircraft just had an engine change that morning and had engine runs done. So any aviator out there knows that there's a whole process of maintenance test flights and tweaking of engines. And the maintenance pilot came over to me and the cowling, the engine cover is off, and the engine is bare bones there. And I told the maintenance guy, I said, you are not going to get a chance to fly this aircraft.
Yeah.
We have got the only PLS system on the board. For the listeners, it's a personnel locator system, which tracks radios that you guys are carrying and gives us a heading and distance to where that radio is. So we're the only ones that can track any type of ground movement in the air. And then I had a huge, powerful commitment to get back into the fight because I left guys on the ground that I bonded with over the weeks and time. So it took us an hour. It took us literally an hour to get gas, to switch things from my aircraft to the spare aircraft, put the engine cowling on, get everything ready to go. And to this day, the crew was ready to get back out in the fight. And then, sadly enough, when we got back up in the air, Mike Durant and Ray Frank's aircraft had been shot down, and they were battling that world. And then we rolled into Super 6-2's downed aircraft situation, and I had a chance to pick up Brad Halling, who got injured at that in that aircraft, Super 6-2, and took him back to the cache. And then it was a matter of I think human nature, but maybe it's just our personalities. You have this hope and you have this wish that people were okay.
Yeah.
So until, like you talked about Pella, we heard that Cliff Walcott was dead on the radio. I had this hope that Donovan Briley, who was his co-pilot, was alive. Mike Durant, Randy Shugart, and Gary Gordon, and Mike's crew. We had a hope all night long that they were alive. So we spent the next 16 hours. Let me back the story up, because I told the maintenance guy, I said, "You're not going to get a chance to fly this aircraft, but tell me what I need to look for in case something."
We're not sure if it's all the way put back together, but I'm going to put this thing in the air no matter what. Yeah.
But you need to tell me if there's an engine problem, what I'm looking for in the engine problem. So 16 hours later, we spent all night long getting rocked with
Yeah.
RPGs and following radios that we thought were possessed by Americans that
Uh-huh.
were heading towards the Newport, and they were just radios that were on that the Somalis had. But it was our desires to track down that last
Sure.
person that was maybe trying to save themselves.
Yeah.
And so 16 hours later, we brought it back, and that's when I found out that Donovan had passed away, and I was exhausted.
Yeah.
About 18 and a half hours later.
I don't know. Honestly, this isn't about setting records. I don't know what the record for the most hours in the air over a hostile gunfight is, but
Yeah,
that 18 hours must be close. Just
yeah, I
because of
have
the
no idea.
amount of the limitations on how much time a pilot can spend in the air, and I think rightly so. And you broke almost all of those limitations, and not you broke almost all of those rules just to stay up there and to try to help guys get out alive if possible.
Yeah, but Jeff, it was important. I stayed up there for 24, 36 hours
Yeah,
to bring that
yeah,
last man
sure,
back.
yeah,
And, as fate would have it, we lost so many soldiers that day, and so many soldiers got injured, in that firefight. And as a supporting role of battle, an aviator, you want to do everything you can to help you guys. And we felt so helpless, when you
yeah,
guys were in the fight because we couldn't get down there to help
yeah,
you. We couldn't get down there to get you out of there. But it was an ordeal that obviously will be forever in our hearts,
sure,
ever in
of
our
course,
soul.
yeah,
Um, but I think we fought. I think we fought hard. I think we learned a whole bunch of lessons that I carried forward. Literally 6 months after we left Mogadishu, I was rolled into Haiti. On the Haitian vacation, I called it,
yeah.
because we were
I was
we
taking
kicked.
part in Operation Turnaround too. We were getting ready to JMPI the last couple of people when the JSOC commander came out there and called the whole thing off
called
right before. I mean, the engines were already running before
Yeah,
he called them off. Yep.
I mean, we're 2.5 hours from HR. We're all rehearsed, and we kicked the carrier group off the USS
Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we put 60 helicopters on board, and we had learned so many lessons from Mogadishu that we were rolling right into Haiti. And
Yeah.
I think and I continued to serve for a lot of years after that, with the hopes of passing forward all the lessons learned from that day and those
Yeah.
days to the next fight.
I got to tell you about a moment that happened to me on the ground while you're getting ready to go back up in the air. I have just brought Blackburn back. Dominic Pilla's been killed. Vehicles are shot to pieces like your helicopter. I learned you've just went in and you've inserted the search and rescue force in where Super 6-1 has gone down. Now Super 6-4 has gone down, Jeff. We can't get the QRF out there fast enough, Jeff. You need to go back on the Humvees and you need to get out to Durant's crash site. And I'll never forget it. A great combat leader who I have the utmost respect for at the time, our battalion LNO, a guy by the name of Major Craig Nixon, came up to me and he pulled me off to the side, squad leader, and he said, "Hey, Sergeant, you're about to do the toughest thing we can ask somebody to do in combat. You're about to lead your men back into," and this is his exact words, back into a hot LZ. He said, "Jeff, it's really one thing to go into an LZ not knowing how hot it's going to be and you just respond to it with when you get there. It's a whole nother animal to go lead guys right back into the exact same hot LZ a second time." And then he said something to me that I frankly feel embarrassed that I didn't recognize. He said, "Jeff, I'm looking at your men and they're scared and they need to hear from you. So you need to go talk to them." And he kind of patted me on the back and walked away. And I grabbed a metal folding chair, stood on top of it, said, "All right, guys, gather around. Here's what we're going to do next." And load the vehicles. Let's wash the blood out of the back, load the vehicles. We're going to the Durant crash site. That to this day, Major Craig Nixon's challenge to me has hung in my mind on countless years, not months, years of combat deployment in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Special Operations Task Force. And when I saw you leave your already shot up Black Hawk, get on a spare Black Hawk and go back into the same hot LZ, and not just go back there, but spend the next 16 hours there. Dan, there's not another aviator that I have ever met in my life. And this is the one thing that I wanted to say to you in this episode that I respect more than you. And it's not just the fact that you kept that aircraft level after taking an RPG to the tail while people were sliding down the ropes. It's the fact that you got back in the fight and stayed in the fight all night long, because you and I both know the courage that it took. Now, everybody that we worked with would have done it, but it takes insane courage to do what you just described for our listeners.
Well, Jeff, you're very kind, and thank you very much for those maybe inappropriate but kind words. But
they're entirely appropriate.
And it wasn't, I guess at some point in time, it's not about your personal safety. It's about the guys you fight with, and the hardships and the challenges that they're going through. And you just want to help. At some point in time, you don't know how to help. You don't know what you're doing to participate in their hopefully goodness, but you're trying to help them better their situation.
Yeah.
And we as aviators, we had a three-dimensional picture that you guys didn't have on the ground. And Mike Durant's crash site is one of the things that always haunted me and caused me to come up and develop techniques and procedures for the next fight in case we had to get people out of a compromised situation in a hurry. And so I'll just tell you that we rehearsed a bunch of stuff that dealt with hooking people onto fast ropes and pulling them out of sights in a hurry. But those brave souls, and the 2 Medal of Honor recipients, and the brave souls of the crew, they were just left because of overwhelming situations there in the city. And there's you can't go backwards. You can't shoulda, woulda, coulda that event, but you can definitely carry it forward and better the situation next time if it's presented to you. And I would, and then a few hours later, Stan Wood ended up waking me up, and Mike Durant's alive that next day, and I'm exhausted. I've been up for 24 hours, and I don't even remember Stan waking me up, by the way, but. And then it became the next fight. The next fight was to get Mike Durant back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so besides refitting, rekitting, and rebodying our task force, and you remember, I mean, in 2 or 3 days, we were ready to go back out to fight.
Yeah.
And I think some of us had revenge in our eyes, and some of us were challenged to kind of finish the fight. But then my purpose, along with Captain John Magnus, who we recently lost,
what a shame,
in a hiking act, it became our focus to get Mike Durant back.
Yeah,
definitely. Because he was, and it was amazing how all it happened. And we kind of celebrate the 3rd of October, but I celebrate the 14th of October because that's when Mike got released.
Like you, So I went out to the Durant crash site, got shot to pieces, linked up with McKnight's vehicles, and brought them back to the base. I'm getting ready to roll back out because at this point, nobody's made it to the Durant crash site. And I get stopped by the task force commander who says, we can't keep sending these Humvees out there. They're light skin Humvees, fiberglass and aluminum. And that's when we made the call for help. I joined in. My guys stayed on the same 2 Humvees and joined in with this big multinational convoy, rolled back out in the city streets about 11 o'clock that night. And I stayed out there, the last vehicle to make it back in the next day. Even the Pakistani tanks and the Malaysian APCs left the target before we did. But I also need to say to you, Dan, that I am convinced the miniguns, the Night Stalker miniguns won the fight, carried the fight that night. On the ground, we were responding to what's 10 feet away from us. I don't have the 3-dimensional picture, as you said. And most of the fight is, it's over in a couple of seconds because it's literally 10 feet away. But the big crowds, the big threats, the big problems were all solved by the miniguns until, and I'll never forget the sound of this, about 2:30 in the morning when the little birds were rolling down the street over our head. And for the first time in that fight, I heard the first 2.75 millimeter rocket go off. And I thought, thank God we finally got rockets in the rocket pods. But the miniguns and the rockets, man,
Yeah.
I am alive today because of you, because of your crew chiefs, because of those miniguns that were over my head.
Well, and Jeff, you've been so kind, giving me credit for everything that I do. I'll tell you, and the guys that were with you on the ground, especially the guys in the vehicle that went out numerous times to deal with whatever he had to deal with. It was the most amazing event, watching you guys continue to go out and to continue to try to help the fight. But for the listeners, they talk about the minigun versus the 2.75-inch rocket. Um, um, I wasn't a Little Bird pilot at the time, but I became a Little Bird pilot in the future. I'll just tell you that the enemy was so close to the friendlies that most of the pilots wouldn't feel comfortable shooting a 2.75-inch rocket, and the minigun was absolutely the weapon of choice.
Yeah.
Because it's a 7.62, it's a spin stabilized projectile, and it just it does a much better job in close in ranges like you guys are having to deal with all night long.
Yeah, that minigun made it possible for me to I walked away with because of that minigun and God's gracious hand. I walked out of those city streets without a fight. Actually, I drove out without a scratch. I mean,
and
amazing. But I do want to say, like you, I'm totally exhausted. I fall straight asleep and I get woke up about 2 hours later and I'm running into the little TV room in the hangar to watch what you're watching, everybody else is watching live on the international news as everybody from the Durant crash site their bodies are being dragged through the streets and they're being mutilated right in front of us. And the anger and the frustration I can't even describe, but I'm going to say something to you, Dan, because of a comment that you just made. I felt personally responsible for what the world was seeing because I never actually made it to Durant. And Durant will tell you to this day, he could hear my 50 cal 100 meters away, but I never made it that last 100 meters. I've always felt like I owed Carmen Gordon and Stephanie Shugart, an apology. I'm the reason why those bodies were being dragged through the streets because I never got a chance to make it all the way to the crash site. And maybe I would have made it before that crash site was overrun and those bodies were desecrated. But hindsight's 2020, and I won't go back and try to undo the past.
Right. It's amazing, though, Jeff. You talk about that personal commitment to the fight, and I think every one of us that day had a personal commitment
to each other, basically. Yeah, basically.
And at the end of the day, the reason we were out there and the people we took off the target, that all went away. And then when that first aircraft went down, or maybe even when Blackburn, ended up dying, God rest his soul, when things started going south, as we call it, and for the listeners, it just means things are not going well. We kind of bonded up, kind of linked arms together and say, okay, now it's about you and it's about me, but it's more about everybody else. And we got to get everybody out of here, and the hopelessness that we feel. I mean, we would have given up the whole force to help Mike Durant and his crash site, pull those bodies out successfully if we were ever able to do that.
If there was,
as fate would have it, would have it, we weren't able to do that. We weren't able to, put the assets forward. But like I said, hindsight's 2020. I carry forward that thought and to the next battle and to the next series of battles as we continue to fight the fight. And 9/11 comes down, 8 years later.
If there was a scene, I'm trying to bring this conversation to a close right now, that I would have put in the movie Black Hawk Down. It's the scene right after your aircraft has been hit, right after you've taken it back to the airfield, when you and your crew go to that spare aircraft. Because if you want to know the level of commitment and courage of Task Force Ranger, that scene right there shows it. And stays in the fight. You stay in the fight, not just for the next 16 hours, but really for decades until you retire after 40 years of service. Dan, you have inspired me. As a leader, you've inspired me as a warrior. And I mean, for decades, this conversation I should have had with you 30 years ago. But thank you for the kind of warrior and the leader that you are, man.
Yeah, let me, and I know you want to close this thing out, and I do appreciate your time more than anything else. But Jeff, thank you for your commitment and your passion and your compassion when it comes to talking to people and just bringing up different situations and they're pulling it out of individuals and to make the story kind of known to the masses out there. You know what's funny is just like your story about you going to Mike Durant's site. It's been 30 years. But there's tidbits and there's little bits of information about the fight that day that I still learn every time I talk to somebody, because you just don't know the whole big picture of it. It was in 1993. It was such a sensitive, emotional issue. It took the Night Stalkers. It took us 2 years to even talk about it. And in your organization and mine also, we did a great job of just kind of what we call AAR, after action review, just to make sure we better the fight for the next fight. But it was such an emotional, and we lost a lot of friends, and we lost, injured a lot of people. But we couldn't talk about it. We rolled right into the next fight, So I appreciate your time talking about what we're doing.
My first guest ever on Unbeatable was Kenny Thomas, who was, of course, in the city streets of Somalia with me. And the listeners need to know this. I didn't talk about Somalia to anybody. Didn't talk about it to my family. I didn't even talk about it to other Rangers because I didn't want to hear their responses. And then Kenny said something to me years later that really, really touched my heart. He said, Jeff, you owe it to the guys that are in Arlington National Cemetery to tell what happened and to tell their story. And that was the moment I decided, you know what? I'm going to talk about it a lot. And if God gives me the opportunity, I'm not even going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about other people, because the world needs to know what the guys that you and I served with did during that fight. And that's why.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, man. That's why I just want to say thank you for being part of this special mini-series. These are the stories that I wish would have made it into the movie. Dan, you're amazing. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your time.
I meant every word that I said to Dan during this episode. There is no one I am more impressed by, actually more inspired by, in an aircraft than Dan Jollota and what he did over my head in Somalia. Dan, thank you. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for you, buddy. I want to thank the guests. I want to thank all of the audience that are listening to this episode. And if you just started hearing this mini series, man, there's a lot of amazing conversations that we've had in the past more than 100 episodes that you should go back and check out. Maybe you should just go ahead and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, or if you want to watch the video, go subscribe on our YouTube channel. There's some pretty incredible guests that we've talked to. There's also some pretty incredible people that stay connected with us on social media. And our fan of the week for this week is Desley Power. And I just want to say to Desley, thank you for being so engaged and so involved on social media. If you haven't found us on social media, you can just simply go out there and search @Unbeatable Podcast, and you'll stumble across us on almost any social media platform. Dan is an amazing, legendary warrior, not just an aviator. But there's also some pretty incredible, amazing people that are very connected with this podcast. We call them the Unbeatable Army. And if you want to become part of the Unbeatable Army, it's totally free. I have some free giveaways. I have some free content. I send information to your inbox every week, and we'll never spam you. We'll never blow up your email. But if you want to become part of the Unbeatable Army also, just simply go over to unbeatablearmy.com. Thanks for joining me for this episode. I got 2 more episodes of guests that I'm going to bring you, stories that I think should be in the movie Black Hawk Down, but they never made it. So you got to come back next week and hear my interview with my guest next week. See you next time.